If you see my ridiculous setup here, then, well, it matches the topic, which is how to generate a 50% margin in a startup business, in a startup software business, let's say, a SaaS software business. Might be the appropriate target for our conversation. The Profit 101 series, of which this is a part, everything has been blog post format up to now. So here, I'm trying video. Thought busting out the whiteboard might be a good way to get the idea across. And so, yeah, our topic is how to hit 50% margins, and in specific, how to hit 50% margins in a software business. And I'll start by, answering well, what do I even mean by that? I'll note that, hey, using random stuff you already have around the house, so not spending a lot of money, that's probably a good way to hit a 50% profit margin, a very high profit margin. And for context, most of the highly profitable companies that we all know, big name companies, very few of them actually deliver on a 50% margin. So that is sort of rare air in terms of profitability. But it is something that I've done it, and so I know it can be done, and so just wanted to kind of walk through how to potentially get there. To do that, let's start with a little bit of background on unit economics. Here, I'll put the title up here. Why not? So Profit 101. And so in specific, let's talk about unit economics and how to get to 50% margins and what that implies for really where the money really can go. Like, it leaves you pretty constrained. If you want 50%, if you want half of every dollar coming from your customer to go to your bottom line, well, that leaves you pretty constrained in terms of what you can spend. You've got to work within half, and that includes the cost of your actual product. So let's kind of break that down. Let's say that, here you're going to see my crap drawing skills, but here, let's say that this is all of our revenue, for one customer transaction, or, since we're talking about SaaS, let's say for one monthly bill. In the SaaS case, let me go wider than that to start, though. Let's just talk about any product, and let's just hypothetically use $100 as our price point. So the total revenue we're getting in from the customer is $100. So we're trying to say that half of it will be, I don't know, that's roughly half. Half of it will be profit, all this stuff up here. So we will label that profit. And I'm talking pre-tax profit here, to be precise. So I'm not worried about Uncle Sam, at least in this equation. If you want to go for 50% after-tax margins, there are businesses that have achieved that. The businesses that do, they are rare. So let's focus on 50% pre-tax margins. Okay, so that means that we've got to run our entire business on half. So for this particular transaction of $100, that means we've got $50 to work with. And here's where it gets really tough. If you've got $100 and your cost of goods sold is a significant percentage of that, then there's this concept called gross margin, which is basically how much money is left over after you buy the product that you're going to give the customer, or after you provide the service that you're providing to the customer. And so, for instance, if you are Amazon.com, this is impossible. At least on their e-commerce business, it's fundamentally impossible. Why? Because they're not taking these kinds of margins. Or if you're Walmart or any kind of retailer, you don't, in that sort of volume retail, you don't typically have 50%, or rather, you don't have 100% markup. Meaning, if the product costs you $10, you don't sell it for $20. Your margins are narrower than that. But let me take a concrete example that's closer to home. In the business the business that I'm in today, 50% margins are very, very challenging because, most of the money goes to the consultants that, are in our marketplace. And so this becomes very difficult. In the SaaS world, though, it's absolutely achievable. And let's look at why. So if $100 is what comes from the customer, $50 is our target profit. Well, that leaves us 50, obviously, but some of that needs to go to some very basic expenses. Like if there's $100 that we're collecting, and typically you're taking credit cards or otherwise processing payments, right off the bat, you've got the 100. Well, we'll just call it $3. About 3% is going out for just processing fees. And so, I don't know, we'll call that this little stripe here. So that's 3% in, I don't know, we'll just call them fees. So that's gone right there. And so now that's 3 points off the total, by the way. That leaves us 47 points left to run our entire business. And so that includes all of your salaries, everything, within your company. Includes marketing, includes sales, etc. What other expenses do you have? You've got things like hosting, you've got, if you're talking about a SaaS business, you've got all of those kinds of costs. So many of us today are building on top of APIs like OpenAI or similar. So you've got those costs, right? Here's the tricky part. In order to have a 50% margin, think about it now from a standpoint of gross revenue, like across your entire company. That means that all of your salaries, everything has got to compress down to within, actually not 50%, but 47%. You've got another stripe here that you likely are spending on or are going to be spending on, and that's marketing. And by marketing here, I don't mean internal hires. I mean the actual marketing dollars that flow out the door. So depending on how efficient you are at marketing, you might be able to keep these numbers down. In our case at Hidden Levers, we were able to keep these numbers quite low. We had a marketing budget of around $250,000 by the end, which comes to less than 3%, of what our, my math right there. Yeah, about 30x of that, a little more than 30x of that. So less than 3% in our case, but that's not common. Usually you're going to be expending more than that, and we probably should have spent more than that. So actually, you're probably spending something closer to 5 or even 7% on hard marketing costs. So you've got fees going out the door. You've got your marketing budget itself. So for context, if you're running at $1 million ARR, or you get to that point, $70,000 for marketing. That's actually not a lot. A lot of companies are spending far more than that. And before you get into sort of profitability, you may be spending more than that, and that's okay. But at that sort of target endpoint, you see how thin you start to have to slice things. Because so far, all we've paid for is our credit card fees and our marketing. There's likely another band, but I'm going to slice it pretty thin here, of actual cost to run your software and service. And why am I slicing that one pretty thin? So this would be, let's call this everything that underpins your software. Since we're talking about SaaS, so that's your hosting, your API calls, all of that stuff. You probably need to squeeze that into somewhere around 5% for what I'm going to call this is COGS, which in accounting parlance is cost of goods sold. So the underlying stuff that scales with, as you sell more, you've got to get more of this. It really needs to be thin. So now we've spent 15 percentage points, or $15 since I'm using a $100 example. So now basically what this tells us is, and this is the essential point that I wanted to get at, you've got to run your entire business, meaning your internal costs, meaning really this is, your workforce. So all of your different teams, or as you're growing, so that's your sales folks, your marketing folks, your product dev team, your customer success, all of the management, administration, everything. That has to fit into right around 1/3 of revenue. Actually, I'm going to say it differently if I'm going to be more aggressive about this. And the reason why would I be aggressive about it is because the truth is that there's always some slippage. Like maybe you end up needing to spend more on marketing. Maybe your goods actually cost you more than 5%, even in the SaaS case. So really, if you want to get to this kind of number, then the what I want to leave you with is that you've only got about 1/3 of your gross margin well, I'll say revenue or gross margin. I'll be nice. Revenue makes it a little easier. But you've only got about 1/3 of that to spend on the actual business itself, all of your costs. If you can cram down into that equation, that's what it takes to get to a 50% profit margin. And the beauty of getting to such a margin, and if you can do that, while growing, then the beauty of that is that leads to an exceptionally valuable company. And so it's not easy. What this series of videos is going to be about is how do you get there. But I want to keep this in mind. And by the way, this is the same kind of mental math that I'm seeking to do today. Again, with fraction, for instance, that within our gross margin. So in that business, just to take a slightly different case, there's a substantial cost because we are paying service providers. But what's left for us to run our business on, and that's the gross margin. Can we run at scale, spending only 1/3 of that on our internal costs, so that we still generate industry leading profits? So that's our goal, and that's the goal of this series. Keep that number in mind, and we're going to unpack that a little bit more. How do you get your costs down to this level in pursuit of extraordinary profit margins, which can lead to extraordinary exits? Thanks.